Okay, we're just gonna wait for people to join. Let's give them a minute or two. It's we had obviously a long break for lunch, so hopefully people are coming back. Okay, they are actually. I can see that. Yeah. So just give them a few minutes, few seconds to join. Okay, I think we can get started. Yeah, that should be fine. So hi, everyone, and welcome to this session with Tiani, Yulia, and John Nicholas. So the flow of the session for today is that Yulia's going to be up first and give a talk, and Tiani will be coming up next, and then John Nicholas will be the last one to speak. And then at the end of that, there'll be like a joint session, and they'll be sharing a mirror board with all of you, so you can see what they're doing. I'm Jen Ashley, and I've been co-chairing MapCamp for I guess this is our 6th year now. It started in 2017, so it's been around for a while. It's always been in person, but obviously everyone went virtual during the lockdowns, and I believe this is going to remain virtual, so that we can open it up to more people across the globe who can't necessarily come and attend an in-person event. Tiani has been involved with MapCamp for a few years now. She's been giving talks here, and we are happy to see you, Yulia and John Nicholas, speaking here for the first time. So very, very welcome. And I don't want to take up too much time from the three of them, so I'm going to hand over to Yulia, and Tiani is going to be the one sharing the slides for all three of them. So over to you, folks.
All right, thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for having us. I'm Yulia. I'm an economist and researcher by training, and our group was tasked to offer a discussion of an economic system that works for everyone. And while this subject is impossible to cover in under 45 minutes, we will highlight some fundamental principles. Then we will present an example of a firm focused on limiting the effects of climate change by specializing in energy efficiency. But before we begin mapping, we will review the elements of a well-functioning system that enables economic progress. Modern economic societies depend on a system of complex exchange interactions, both within nations and across borders. A nation's productive capability depends on its resources, technological knowledge, and institutional arrangements that either enable efficiency or restrict potential. And next slide, please. Stressing the importance of institutions is important because they structure the incentives underlying individual action. They create the rules of the game within the economic system. To illustrate an effective economic system, a prominent economist, Peter Boettke, uses the idea of a three-legged stool in his research of the transitional political economy of the post-communist era. He examines the interaction between political and legal, economic and financial, and social and cultural spheres within a society, and concludes that these elements are essential for the emergence of a robust political economy. He says that the stool is only sturdy, or the economic system is robust, when all three can withstand the pressures of power struggles, power problem, knowledge problems, opportunism, and other issues inherent in centrally planned systems. If any of those legs are weak, the entire system naturally collapses. Many rules are created endogenously. Those that are created by the state need to imply the generality principle, meaning that these rules are abstract and they do not favor one group over the other. Take, for example, property rights, which are regarded as human rights by the economist Armin Alkin. The definition, allocation, and protection of property rights are some of the most difficult tasks that a society must resolve. Secure property rights are indispensable for prosperity. Institutions, therefore, have a first-order effects. and policies have a second order effect. Successful institutional change comes from within a society and it cannot be imposed from the outside. Keeping the basic elements of private property in mind, such as the exclusivity of rights to choose how to use a resource, exclusivity of right how to service the resource, and rights to exchange the resource at a mutually agreeable term, think of the following. On the one hand, there are state-imposed limitations on how to use resources, and on the other hand is the individual who may choose how to employ his property within the economic system. And this touches on productive versus unproductive entrepreneurship. That is creating value versus rent seeking in economics terms. Productive behaviors such as arbitrage, creation and innovation, and other socially beneficial endeavors are the very essence of economic growth and progress. Thus, the role of an entrepreneur is essential. Modern economic entrepreneurship theory is broadly divided into two types, and both advance the productivity frontier. The Schumpeterian account of entrepreneurship begins with status quo and disrupts the existing equilibrium through technological innovation. And the Krishnerian theory of entrepreneurship, on the other hand, begins from disequilibrium and accounts for the equilibrating role of the entrepreneur through arbitrage. Both of these are productive, value-creating types of entrepreneurs who enable economic progress and recovery from external economic shocks. Now, next slide, please. Certainly, productive entrepreneurs face uncertainty. In his seminal paper, Uncertainty, Evolution, and Economic Theory, Armin Alkian explains that evolutionary nature of the firm's behavior in conditions of constant uncertainty. He says, the greater the uncertainties of the world, the greater is the possibility that profits would go to the venturesome and lucky rather than logical, careful, fact-gathering individuals. He applies Darwinian principles of adaptation to the survival of the firms engaged in exploratory behavior, where price system allows for the important economic calculation and provides the necessary feedback. Now, typically, economic models for firm behavior discuss profit maximization. However, Alkian said that positive profits based on successful strategies help determine resource allocation. The more decisions are put to test within an economic system, the more time will allow for the creation of firms where competition leads to higher quality goods and services at lower prices, greater variety, and more innovation that is available for everyone to enjoy. Those firms that fail to adapt will likely fail in the long term. But evolution and competition will ensure economically optimal outcomes and economic progress for everyone.
All right. And so Yulia touched on uncertainty. So that's the section that I'm going to kind of give some explanation to, and it's kind of a lens that we can use as we're analyzing the map. You might hear us talk about different kinds of uncertainties and where they arise. I guess just a brief intro. I'm Tiani. I have been speaking at MapCamp for 3 years now. I work in organizational design and change, coaching large enterprises to work in better ways, using lots of concepts, socio-technical concepts to help them understand their systems. And so this is one thing that I'm really interested in is uncertainty. So when there's a really interesting white paper that this image is taken from, and it's by Dweck, and it's sources of uncertainty in the marketplace and in product development. And the two things that I wanted to call out was this idea of this, the kind of the dotted line around what you would call kind of like the system boundary. It's kind of important to understand what is the core system boundary. And in this case, it's the corporate context. Call that just the things that comprise that corporation, that entity, whatever that dotted line that makes that system. So uncertainties within there are considered endogenous, which means that they have an internal causal origin. As you can see, there's lots of things to consider there. It's like how you create and deploy your strategy, the technology available. These are things that Yulia already touched on. The reliability of what you actually build, and that can link to, it's really complex when you think how that links to all the practices, how you learn, how you create the structures of your organization. And then the things that are how you interface with those outside. So there's like the contracts for how you may for maintenance and other contractual arrangements that you have in order to do business. There's within that, there's some use context that can become, that's endogenous, and there's use context that's also outside, which is outside of the corporate context boundary, which would be exogenous, which means relating to or developing from external factors. And so depending on what it is you build, what it is you produce, whatever it is that you provide into the market, there's things that are like operator skill, environment, there's the supply chain, the suppliers that you work with. You may have contracts with them, but then they have their own dotted line systems around their operations and how they produce their parts and whatever they supply. And you have competition. And then as you move further to exogenous, further out from that dotted line boundary, there's things that you literally have no control over. There may be notions of things that could happen, might happen, but this is the nature of complex systems where there's emergence. And that's where you see the nature of warfare. Could be fashions of the day, which you can't always predict. Regulations, and we'll touch on that a little bit at a high level and with a couple of examples around regulation. Natural disasters, those kinds of things. And so these are this uncertainty and understanding where they come from, what some of those are useful in mapping and in understanding, like, what do we see, what do we understand, and then how can we potentially create strategies around that. So I did have one example. I think I'll do this one really briefly. So I worked on and this is an example of how a corporation can leverage their basically in the face of uncertainty, what they do and how they respond to it, and how there's things that are unforeseen and how that affects their business. So the talk that I gave last year at Map Camp was around early in the pandemic. I worked with a group of volunteers trying to figure out contact tracing for on mobile devices. And they were super excited. They thought this is going to help and solve this problem. A couple months in, Apple and Google collaborated on an API that provided some contact tracing and notifications and all these kinds of technology. And then regulations started to pop up because there was concern about privacy, information that could be shared, personal health data, that kind of thing. And then what happened is we can't just volunteer our time, put together this app, put it into the market, because now you have to get actual sign off and a letter of intent, basically from a large educational institution or a state that they're going to use your app for some kind of contact tracing. And unless you had that, you couldn't even get into the App Store. And so the group I was working with, a branch of this group, several individuals in this group broke off and decided to create a new offering. And that offering was for corporations, event centers, stadiums, schools, anyone that had operations that needed to continue or wanted to find a way to get back to bring their operations back up and have what they called biosecurity, safety measures for the employees, know who's home, who's quarantining, have temperature checks and entry at different points when you enter buildings, like different kinds of checks to kind of make sure that you're safe, that you're healthy. And if you're not, you get information and your teammates get information to know what to do, whether they've been exposed or not. So here's an example of exogenous uncertainty. We know where something's happening, and then this corporation then decides there's a market opportunity that they're able to take advantage of, but then they also had to pivot away from something in order to do something else. And so that's kind of like how you can kind of use this analysis to see how they do their strategy. All right, so I'm going to tee up for John Nicholas now. You ready to go?
Yep.
All right.
So my name's John Nicholas. I'm a programmer. I work at Datadog, but I'm going to tell you why and how you could transform your orderly map into a financial bond graph. So it does connect, but a bond graph is a formalism originally used for modeling power transmission. It combines the semantics of ordinary differential equations with the aesthetics of molecular diagrams from chemistry. There's a rich network of analogies among the hydraulic, mechanical, and electrical domains. For example, a pair of wires can transmit power, or a rotating shaft could transmit power. Current and voltage multiply to form power, and torque and angular velocity also multiply to form power. Electrical resistance is analogous to mechanical friction and so on. So extending those analogies, in a financial bond graph, we multiply a flow of units per time by an average price per unit to get a flow of money. There's a lot more details about bond graphs, but the important thing is that when there's an edge, one side of the edge is setting the price, behaving as a price setter according to your model. It's a perspectival thing. And the other side of the edge is setting the volume, and we indicate that with a little stroke. So let's walk through an example. An NMC battery uses a cathode made of lithium, nickel, manganese, and cobalt. Imagine that we wanted to make a certain number of cathodes per month. That's a source of flow. Each cathode consists of some quantity of this NMC alloy, like such and such number of grams. And then the NMC molecular formula, the stoichiometry, has some number of nickel atoms, some number of manganese atoms, some number of cobalt atoms, and you can see those units conversions in the transformer nodes. I don't actually know what the X, Y, and Z are. And then there are these capacitor nodes. So the sense here is you can determine a price by adding up how deep we're digging into the order book, or how deep we're digging into the mountain. That is, the total flow is determining the price by some functional relationship. So if we go to the next slide, why would you do this? Well, adding a bond graph, augmenting your Wordley map with these little strokes gives you new ways to be wrong. One of the ways is kind of obvious, which is if you have a model and there's a node and the money flowing in and the money flowing out doesn't add up, then you know that your model is missing something. Like you've estimated, you've graphed all the things, and then you're like, huh, it doesn't add up. I guess there was something wrong. That's what I mean by a clash. But there's another kind of clash, which is if your model says that someone has no grounds, has no possible grounds for making different decisions, or no grounds for setting a price or a volume. So if you go on to the next graph, so this is the same, on the left is the same graph as before, and I'm just sort of circling these possible clashes where you could go through and say, well, we do need to know how many grams of NMC alloy goes into one cathode. What is that number? That's a missing coefficient. Or another thing is, a transformer really shouldn't have two strokes next to it like this. it's saying what, that someone picks the volume of cobalt to purchase out of thin air. No, they have to get the volume from somewhere, and maybe the fix is like this, or maybe there's some other source, like some element that's missing here. Generally, the clash doesn't tell you how to fix it, just that you need to fix it. So if we go on to the next slide, the why is, it gives you new questions to ask, very generic questions that you can ask in a whole lot of different situations. You can also move your price and volume estimates through the graph, creating these new ways to be wrong when you're contradicting yourself. It gives you crude but grounded estimates, and sometimes it's difficult to position your components on the evolution axis, but if you know, because you've transformed it into a bond graph, how you're paying for things, and you can use it to decide if we're calling it a commodity, do we pay for it like it's a commodity? The important thing is that both sides of the link influence the other via this. One side is deciding the price, and the other side is deciding the volume. That's it.
All right. Okay, so let's see if we can go through our map. So what we're going to try to do now is we're going to walk through a map, and we decided that it would be easier to focus on a business. And there's multiple, so when we talk about an economic system that works for everyone, there's so many different aspects that we could look at. So we thought this might be an interesting area, looking at Tesla's quest for addressing environmental effects. So there's, well, we'll go into kind of like the aspects of the business that involve environment, the whole value chain, what's produced, how regulation affects that in some ways, different types of ways to collaborate. And so one is the institutional environment in which entrepreneurs have the freedom to experiment. So we're going to kind of define what institutional environment is, and then go into that kind of line of reasoning and walking through our map. And then the second is the polycentric governance and a continuous iterative approach to improving clean energy usage and efficiency. Understanding, again, defining what does polycentric governance mean? How does that show up? And then how might this be applied in this particular case? So I'm gonna switch over to our map. Give me just 1 second. All right. Okay. So why don't we just walk through our map to get started? At the top, we have just defined a consumer. Do y'all want to talk a little bit more about how we landed with this like focus just on transportation and just kind of like broadly a consumer to start with? The broad theme of a consumer without any other qualifications to what that actually means and why this transformation, this value stream of transportation. Should we start there?
Yeah, we could. So transportation just is an essential task. Everyone needs it in one form or another. And while we're looking specifically at Tesla, and they do also offer the solar energy supplies for the homeowners as well, we just decided that it would be better to focus on one line of thinking and demonstrate what we can find in the limited amount of time that we have here today. We also wanted to merge that with these pressing need and an important desire by many people to actually use clean energy to power their cars and use the options that are actually green and are not contributed to the climate change that we're all feeling the effects of. So that's why we thought this would be a good point to bring up the need for transportation, specifically the electric car, as a good alternative to a regular gasoline powered emissions type of car.
Yeah. And the reason why we have this kind of big gray box, like that pipeline notation, is because transportation is kind of it's big. It can be all the way over to Genesis. I can't even think of like a technology, a transportation technology that's in Genesis. I don't know, maybe seeing that guy with the jetpack, there's the test that they've been doing with him. Maybe that's kind of like, that's interesting. And then all the way over to the other end of commodity, it could be just like, public transportation, even walking, who knows, like pedestrian sidewalks for pedestrians to get around, so just acknowledging the fact that there are many transportation options. And so the idea was, okay, if the choice is electric car, then what are the factors here that like Tesla's leveraging to get electric cars into people's driveway? So what are some other aspects of the value chain that we should call out? I think it might be cool to like follow this train of just the technology itself, from the charging times and the battery innovation, before we go into defining the actual like thing that we've called out here with the institutional environment. So what about the value chain in terms of the technology itself down to through the charging time and the battery and its potential evolution? Well, it's actually how it is evolving. What's interesting there?
I think that someone who sort of puts themselves in in hindsight, Tesla founder's shoes might see that there's a whole lot of different moves, like the developing new technologies is something, but purchasing a whole lot of or leasing a whole lot of charging stations is another supporting move, and not all of them are the same, like highly innovative. It's just perfectly ordinary. Yes, Tesla is allowed to use this to operate a charging station agreement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's why we place this in this product rental, like as like that's how they kind of engage. That's the maybe contractual arrangement that they have. So they create those. Those are so that's kind of that link from endogenous into exogenous uncertainties that can happen there. Yep, that's cool. What else is interesting? I like this thread around the idea that shorter EV charging times and longer range operation as a thing that is in development, in constant innovation, being pushed forward. Could we talk a little bit more about the battery technology just to explain that?
So I don't know a lot about it, but I know that these are not the starting batteries in a lead acid battery in a internal combustion engine car. So I don't know, but possibly these lithium batteries were funded by research that the government did to develop batteries for cell phones. So repurposing the innovation that someone else has done and sort of bringing it to a new domain is another way to innovate. Then there's this link to the lithium iron phosphate batteries. So the cobalt in NMC is generally mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And there's a concern that warlords are using forced labor to mine cobalt and purchase arms. And so Europe in 2017 added a law that requires purchasers to document their supply chain, not just one link, but all the way down to, and where did that person get it from? Which is this thing on the upper left, ethical sourcing of components. There's innovation happening right now. The NMC batteries are being replaced by the LFP batteries. And I don't know, but possibly the lack of cobalt in the LFP batteries is related to the regulation, that the regulation might be driving the innovation or steering the innovation in some way.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. So one thing I think we can go, one thing I thought was interesting is we're gonna just define what the institutional environment is in a second, but let's just talk a little bit about, before we do that, just like competition. And so competition as a factor, there's other choice for electric vehicles. There's hybrid. And one thing I thought that was interesting in our conversation was this is an all electric play that Tesla has. There's other choices that could be made that are all electric and some that are hybrid. And some of the data shows that if we're talking about what is best for the environment from a immediate benefit, or not immediate, but like the when to see the benefit to emissions the soonest, there's a hybrid. There's a lot of data that shows that hybrid solutions leveraging existing infrastructure are actually, you get the payoff much sooner than if you were to go completely electric, which that whole process is not 100%, is not actually super, the manufacturing and all of the things that happen through the supply chain to get to a full electric vehicle actually costs more and has more emissions. So that's kind of like something interesting. So I think that's kind of like a good segue just to talk to what is an institutional environment? And then we have like a thread of questions we can like tease out from there. Is that something that you could share as far as a definition for that, Yulia?
Yeah, of course. So competition is a really interesting one because it is an actual driver for innovation. It's what enables innovation because the firms need to compete for customers. And yes, like Tesla or Lucid or any other number of electric vehicle producers we'll have to compete with a whole bunch of not only hybrid, but also with the regular gas-powered vehicles. And so in that competition, they're going to be searching for, improving their product to make it more appealing for the consumers. So those who are on the verge, so to say, they would tip over into the category, okay, I'm now an electric vehicle kind of person. We also talked about just the branding of that car. So that goes into ways of competing. But also over time, it leads to lower prices, higher quality goods, higher quality cars, and services on it as well. Greater variety with a lot of firms who supply electric vehicles. There's definitely going to be a lot of choice for people who are looking to buy an electric vehicle. And of course, like I said earlier, more innovation. So this is the primary driver of progress and advancements. And so in the West, in the Western economies, mixed economies, typically competition is viewed as a good thing. It's not the case. It's not the case across the world. Like I come from a post-Soviet republic. And so, for example, widely competition over there in my home culture is viewed like something to, not have. It's not a good thing to have. But of course, multitude of economic research proves that competition is really good to achieve good results, optimal economic results and progress. So that touches on the sort of the shared mental models idea, which falls under the institutions. And we here we use institutions in and in economics in general, in broader sense. Institutions are used not only just as organizations that establish rules, like the Fed, or yes, sure, they do set up rules for us to play by, but they're also informal social rules, social norms, and shared mental models, like viewing competition and encouraging competition by, the policies that we have in place is an important factor. So on the map here, we also have the sustained belief in the importance of green energy is something that is required for Tesla and similar companies like Tesla to operate and continue to create and innovate and offer these like disruptive technologies to the market. So we use this here as an institutional environment in a sense, because that is something that enables more research and more innovation in the area of addressing the climate change effects by producing more energy efficient methods like an electric car or solar panels, etc.
Yeah, I think this was an interesting thing to think of, these like using the term institution for something that's kind of like a belief and a collection of ideas that are like, belief in the importance of green, or Tesla's the most innovative and disruptive. We talked about that a lot and we kind of connected that to this idea of branding and marketing. Like, what is it that creates that perception? It's not an institution, but there's we in traditional sense of the word, but there's like some kind of maybe there's some kind of belief around that. And we talked about even I think it was John Nicholas, you mentioned how a car was launched into space. And
or more recently there was a walking robot like prototype concept demoed. Why, if an actor in a field is doing an action, then you can speculate, why are they doing that action? Why did they make that decision? And look for elements in your model, or add elements in your model, which is Well, they needed it for some reason. They needed to support maybe the branding or the ecosystem that they need in order to continue whatever their strategy is.
Yeah. So what are some ways that this does not work? We talked this idea of like an economic system that works for everyone. So we've kind of talked how Tesla can leverage or maybe they generate this buzz that they're the most innovative and disruptive by the fact that they've innovated in certain ways and they can do and there's these things they can do with the robot or launching a car into space because they can. And then the fact that people are interested in green energy, they may not, and there's a perception that if you have an electric vehicle, then you're saving on emissions. This is a good way to go. And then maybe you're weighing against the competition, and then ethical sourcing of components. Like that's maybe not information that's readily available to everyone, but these are things that Tesla can leverage so that they can actually like produce into the market. What are some things that are maybe not, how might these not work in some ways, or what is there like a shadow side that you can see to any of this?
I think I'm not sure if it's shadow side per se, but definitely, the information that's coming out about unethical or illegal, what we would view as illegal ways of obtaining, the cobalt and et cetera, and other components. But that, again, through just sort of how information flows, that always comes to light one way or another. And then when consumer is informed, they can make their decisions. But I think at the same time, the entrepreneurs, these firms that create these new types of vehicles, they should be allowed space to, they should be given space, not restricting space, to experiment, right? To explore where they can find components for their product, where perhaps they could, search for new methods of developing batteries. Maybe there's some other, 2.0 type of battery that's even better, more productive, but that all comes as a result of just this healthy market competition that sort of forces more and more R&D and testing, and sort of seeing what types of products the market will accept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that there's an interesting thing that we can't seem to see how the electric car budget would go to support of the institutional environment that Tesla has inherited, like in the US at least. There's other things like their branding and marketing around how it is valuable to not have polluting cars, that we can see, yes, there is a flow of money from this institution, from the business to that institution. This is one of those no visible means of support, like one of the clashes that I mentioned. Possibly there's inertia here, that we can anticipate if it's unfunded, it will decay. I don't know exactly, but this is the kind of maybe possibly anticipating the future that we can do with orderly mapping.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's a good segue to the polycentric governance idea. If we look at the top left of the map, we put that as just a node hanging out there so we could talk about that one. Can we define what that means as a start? What is polycentric governance?
Yeah, sure. That's a tricky one, to know because it's infinitely customizable and it should be designed in the place and in time, or created, I guess. It's a set of connections between authorities, independent but interdependent at the same time, and they could be multi-level. Like in the case of this organization, it could be local, state, regional, national, international, global, when we talk about the climate change, the addressing of climate change. Then it could be multi-type. It could be, the jurisdictions that affect the operations of this particular company. Or some sort of multi-sectoral almost. It could involve public, private, voluntary interests. Research centers on climate change, they could be involved in this process of collaboration and iterative approach to creating the best system of governance that sort of works for as many people, as many groups, I should say, as possible. And at the same time, maximizes the choice for consumers. And also possibilities and opportunities for the firms to experiment and learn just among these sort of governing units. So, a typical example that's usually provided is just the market and how it operates, or and how it sort of arrives to the optimal outcomes, or the scientific process, the research that happens, around the globe, and sort of we come up to these like common consensus, that we know, okay, this is now what we know about this. Specifically about climate change, we know that, okay, emissions contribute the most to the effects that we're observing in nature. So it is, like I said, independent, but also interdependent authorities that overlap and work together to resolve a governance problem. And climate change is something that requires governance that is distributed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking through some other elements of polycentric governance, that some ideas that popped to mind would be the accessibility of data, like that the data is shared and leveraged for decision making, for safety, for experimentation, for all those kinds of things.
Yeah. So
also
remember
shared
we talked about, oops, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I think you had an example.
Well, I was just gonna bring up one example that's kind of emerging in the news anyway. The vehicle to grid charging options, or the idea of bidirectional charging, in which the state utilities, that's one authority, right? The regulation and the EV owners and the organization can cooperate to achieve a more optimal energy use. And they actually suggest the utility, it's in California, and the utility company there suggests that they can actually rescue the power grid, which is that infrastructure has been known to have issues. So that's a good example. It's maybe a smaller scale. They could grow, but also this idea of polycentric governance could grow. But this is like a mini example where there's possibilities of that interaction that benefits the most of most of these groups that are using the elements of the system.
Hi, everyone. Sorry to interrupt because we're running out of time. There's one question I think from Simon that maybe we can just pick now and then. If you can give input to that, and then we can wrap up afterwards, if that's okay with everyone.
Yeah.
Because we need time to prepare for the next session and for people to be given time to go to other sessions as well if they want to. Okay, so can you see the question from Simon on the chat?
Yeah, so when mapping out Tesla, what was the key thing that surprised you? Lack of awareness of the dangers of marketing versus practice. For example, the existing institutions promote the use of hydrogen as a clean fuel, but the reality is most hydrogen comes from steam reforming of methane. The idea that electrolysis can be used with renewable appears mostly a marketing cover for expanding the use of natural gas. Yeah. John Nicholas, go ahead.
I was a little bit surprised. It's difficult to see here because we had a whole lot of other things on the map at some point, but there's a waste of the map where a whole lot of Tesla's ventures go through shared battery technology. And when you look at the marketing stunts, like the throwing a car into space via SpaceX, like how does that fit in? And then you look at all of these other things. Well, having a whole lot of different things that all point to the importance of green energy and funneling to this battery technology purported to be an answer stood out. Like, it's not a different strategy. It is the same strategy over and over again. Market and say, we already have an answer, it's coming.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that surprised me, I don't know if it was a surprise, but learning about what an institutional environment was, that was something that Yulia was able to define. And then kind of like realizing how much that marketing, like it is a cover in various ways, from if you just talk about straight up the processing and creating of electric vehicles, that whole value chain, they're able to do some innovative things and pivot when things aren't quite working or chips aren't available. Those, oh, that's great. They can innovate, they can do that. But the fact that it's kind of leveraged for good to like appeal to people and market and get them to purchase. When if we take just like an economic system that's working for everyone, let's include like environmental factors. If we dig in, there it branches out, and there's lots of places where things aren't quite right. That's something that I think, seeing how it branched out and the various factors, like the one you called out, Simon, some of the ones that John Nicholas described, and then just like how that interfaces with the existing economic system that how Yulia described these institutions. For me, it's kind of just had my brain spinning a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. We literally have got a minute left. We've run over around 10 minutes, but that was a very good discussion, and I hope everyone enjoyed that. And encourage everyone to check out the next few tracks. And thanks again, Yulia, Tiani, and John Nicholas. Like Tiani have been involved in MapCon for a few years. Hoping to see Yulia and John Nicholas again next few years. Thanks again for your time. And thank you everyone for joining us. And if you have more questions, please interact with our panelists in the forums and in the lounge. So we'll see you there. Thanks again,
Thank you
everyone.
for having us.
Thank you.